UConn just won their first regular season Big East title in 25 years. Let's party like it's 1999.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we're live. I'm your host, Mark Zanetto, your host for Locked On UConn, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your team every day, every way you do it. We appreciate your tuning in wherever you listen, wherever you get your podcast. The best way to help us grow, leave a 5-star review. Like, subscribe, share, comment, argue, and most importantly, just engage. Be respectful if you want to argue. This episode is brought to you by Nissan. Nissan, are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be like around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them out all out today at nissanusa.com. Wow, what a game on Sunday. I don't have any words other than exactly what I talked about on Friday is exactly what transpired on Sunday. So I'm going to flex on this a little bit. We started off saying we need to focus the game, the offense, the initial push to kind of establish a tempo through Donovan Clingan. He has not been the focal point of an offense since his arrival at UConn. He had Adama Sanogo, a eventual most valuable player of the Final Four that he would essentially back up, and sometimes they would play together. It's just one of those things where his impact sometimes is harder to describe when you see his numbers. I think he's averaging 13 points and 7 rebounds if you round up. That's not eye-popping. That's not, Zach Edey numbers. It certainly isn't what Sanogo was doing on a regular basis. But what people forget is the fact that this team runs an offense that is fluid and can be pick and pop, can be post. It allows other avenues for the team to continue to grow. And I think the last avenue that makes them elite and it makes them even more dangerous as we head into the Big East, the last week of the regular season and then eventual Big East tournament, NCAA tournament, is establishing this, nothing's for certain, but almost automatic scoring from Clingan because of the position he gets, automatic flow of the offense where people have to help down. If they want to help on Clingan, he kicks it out for open threes. He also was a willing passer for cutters, like we saw with Steph Castle. It's been particularly early in the game. And it allows them to do kind of a freshman, sophomore between Castle and Clingan pick and roll, pick your poison type thing, where Steph can kick out to open, shooters on the wings, can look for cutters the way Caravan does on some of those shooting of gaps. It also kind of allows people it doesn't allow people to play off Castle the way they can anymore because he's shown the ability to shoot threes. But we're also forgetting that we have the Big East Player of the Year, in my opinion, Tristan Newton. Putting him in pick and roll, action with Clingan is something that is so hard for teams to guard. The way Newton can get and use his body to contort and get to the rim, to dump it off to Clingan on alley-oops, not just to Sampson, but also to Clingan. I think that's where the next evolution of this offense is going. And it's so crazy that we're in the last week of the season and we're talking about kind of Clingan playing that Sanogo role. I think that's one thing that we forget with how many good shooters we had last year between Hawkins and even, someone like Joey Calcaterra. You obviously still had Newton. You still had Naheem Aleem, who's now with St. John's. So you had a bunch of guys who can shoot threes. Even Andre Jackson, would be a willing shooter when they would leave him open. So there were opportunities for people last year because of the attention that Sanogo would get. I think when we play better teams, smarter teams are going to just say, okay, we'll deal with the fact that Klingon is a matchup nightmare. We don't need to complicate the problem or kind of compound it by doubling him. And then that's where you're in chase mode. And eventually Cam Spencer hits threes, Alex Caravan, Tristan Newton, even Hassan Diarra has been a willing shooter and has done really well. There's just so many ways this team can beat you that you almost have to pick your poison. And if I was scouting against UConn, I would literally do what I feel like we do well, which is staying at home, do not overhelp, allow ISO game to take over. But we don't really do that, right? We start with pick and roll at the top. We start with posting up Klingon when it's just a natural mismatch, which is almost every time. And that's what they did in this game. They didn't go to it every single play or every other play like I suggested last week. And frankly, I don't care. Dan Hurley could outcoach me in his sleep and 7 times on Sunday. So however he wants things to go, I'm a big Dan Hurley fan. So please, don't think that I'm criticizing in that respect. We'll talk about his coach of the year status in our last segment of the day. But the thing that I loved about the way this team played is it got back to taking what the defense gives you. Seton Hall immediately tried to stop Cam Spencer. I feel like a lot of people feel like he's our catalyst, emotional leader, whatever you want to say. I love Cam, but he's probably the third option on this team. Like when you really break it down, I think it should go Klingon first. Then you have Tristan Newton. Sometimes Spencer initiates the offense. Then I would go Caravan. Then I would go Castle. So in that order, any one of those people can potentially be in a situation where they're the best player on the court for any given day. But it should be take what's given, let's drill down from there. And I think that's what UConn did. And that's what makes a 5-point lead turn into 12, turn into 14 at the half, and then eventually 30 for the game. So that was objective one, was to get Klingon going. I think he had 19 and 11 and 5 blocks. It's a pretty good game. The best thing that I saw was in the first half. I said, if we stop Kadari Richmond from being the playmaker he's been against UConn in the past, we'd win that game by 20 plus points. He ended up with 15 and 7, but if you look at the stats, the majority of his production was in the second half when the game was already out of reach. We made a concerted effort to allow Davis to be an ISO player, and we didn't help, and we stayed at home. Just like I said last week when I said, the reason why the Creighton game got away from us is we were in chase mode from the start. Some of that had to do with Klingon being on the bench with 2 fouls, but we lost who we are as a defensive team against Creighton, and they made us pay with open threes. Seton Hall doesn't have the same ability that Creighton does from shooting threes, but they did make some open ones at the beginning because it just was part of the natural flow of the offense. But as we tightened things up, as we started to gain momentum of that game, those open shots didn't fall. And I think obviously playing at home helps, but that was a huge part of stopping, is not allowing Kadari Richmond to not only get himself off, but also play with the type of playmaking ability that he does best. What was his stats last game against us? 23 points, 8 rebounds, or 5 rebounds, 6 assists, and 8 steals. Yeah, he was balling. And yesterday he was essentially a non-factor. 50% of his points and rebounds and assists came in the second half when we weren't playing, I would say, as tough a defense. So that's what I saw in that game. And that's what was so exciting about this team, is there's so much joy around how we go about it. And it is incredibly imperative that we look at the Marquette game in the same way, even though we already won the Big East regular season title. Great. But there's more work to be done. And we'll talk about that on the next segment. This segment is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel, get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players, teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Support Locked On UConn by subscribing. Check that like button. Comment, help us grow. Speaking of growing, Locked On has launched its first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for 24/7, covering the top sports of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. So, adding to what we do here at Locked On, the second segment of this program is about being a parent. I'm sure there's plenty of hosts, fans, anybody that's about Locked On and podcasts in general. Every parent can relate to all the emotion that I saw from Dan Hurley on senior day, which we'll touch on later in the show. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about was I have two young sons and one on the way. So I know a little bit about something about being a master of distraction, which is essentially what creating a great offense is creating situations where you're thinking about one thing and then your team does another. So they've accomplished something that even 4 other national championship teams couldn't do, and that's winning a Big East regular season title. That's why the theme of partying like it's 1999 is all about. That's just an incredible journey and the ability that an accomplishment, because teams that even won a national championship didn't even have that. Now, granted, we were in the AAC for 7 years, but outside of that, I just know the reason why Dan and Andrea Hurley are great parents is they know how to distract their kids. When I'm alone with my boys, when it's the right moment, I may show them something so I can eat something really quick. And there's no different here. With a great win, they have to figure out how to distract their players from celebrating too much on the Big East regular season title and kind of reining it back in. So there's that quick turnaround for Wednesday night in Milwaukee. That's the trick. And I think Dan Hurley's really good at that. I think he teeters on really boasting about his players, but privately, I think you saw that on game day. He sets a standard, and when it's not met, he obviously rips into people. And so I think for us, you really have to look at this Milwaukee trip for Marquette as a business trip. This is nothing more than that. So how do we kind of sustain that same energy that we got from that senior day crowd? And it's something that I feel like you can harken back to the Jim Calhoun era. Who was the player that comes to your mind, if you're listening to this, that would cut off the head of the snake and the body dies? Who is that? That's Ricky Moore, right? I think everybody that's a UConn fan would know Ricky Moore and the things that he did from a defensive standpoint. For me, even though the news just came out probably an hour before I decided to do this podcast that Tyler Kolek is out with an injury. So that makes Stevie Mitchell, I almost said Stevie Jackson, Stevie Mitchell, the junior out of Reading, Pennsylvania, is going to start in his place. So does that make the job easier? Sure. But what I think needs to continue, I think that makes Dan Hurley's job a little bit easier, but in essence, a little harder, because there's always a letdown when a big star, for Marquette at least, isn't going to be in the lineup. And how do you get your team up for a backup, right? I think you see it in football from time to time. Teams let up on defense because they know, Patrick Mahomes is out, so their backup's in. Not to compare Tyler Kolek and Patrick Mahomes, but you get the analogy. I think for me, I watched that Creighton Marquette game. There's still a dynamic offensive team at home. And Cam Jones showed he has the ability to, shoot the lights out when it's necessary, when he has to shoulder the load of being the primary scorer. So I think the cutting off the head of the snake is going to be for him, because there's no word on Iso Iguodala's availability. I think they're going to shut down Kolek for the last week of the season. I don't they lost the Big East regular season, so I see it as a really good strategy on their side. It also, the fan in me, is probably saying, that they're trying to duck UConn. It is what it is, man. I think if Oso doesn't play, UConn is going to be favored by over 10 points in this game. If he does play, I think they're still favored by about 7. And that's probably where they end up winning this game, between 7 and 10 points, 10 plus, because without Kolek in there to direct traffic and without that kind of general, I don't see, unless we have a massive letdown, where Marquette attacks UConn, because Iguodala attacked Klingen early with his speed and his ability to kind of get those little floaters and get one big dunk in that game before UConn went crazy and blew them out. It could happen again. I didn't think this was going to be one of those games where that's possible, but now with potential injuries and them not having the firepower to hang with us, this could be another one of those. We start to build on that 5-point lead. It gets to 12, then 12 becomes 20, and then, all hands on deck. Then we're seeing Andrew Hurley shooting free throws at the end of the game again. We'll see. I think for me, that's also comes back to the idea of Dan Hurley being a great parent, because I know he is, because he gets his team up for even games like this where there's probably not going to be that big of it. There's outside of us securing a 1 seed, which I think we've already done. This was a tough one. What do you say to your team other than get better each day? Setting the UConn standard, making sure that the fans that come out for these games know that you are playing as hard for this game as you would have for senior day. Because there's going to be plenty of us tuning in and getting ready for this game like it's the Seton Hall revenge game again, without a doubt. And I'm going to dive into one thing that I think John Fanta mentioned this about UConn being an avalanche earlier this year. I've never actually witnessed an avalanche. You see them on YouTube, if like a snowboarding video or whatnot, but I think they resemble more of quicksand, and because it's a slow death. Every game that a team starts to try to fight faster or work harder to, trim a 4-point lead, then it balloons to 10, then it balloons to 14. And the harder they work, the more, and I'm taking Seton Hall as an example, the harder Seton Hall worked against us, the more they turn the ball over. We squeeze you, whether you want to use the term quicksand, because, with quicksand, the harder you fight, the faster you sink. So it could be something like that. I love that analogy, but also they're kind of like a boa constrictor. I mean, once they have you in their grips, they just kind of keep going a little bit tighter, every possession, and that's Dan Hurley's style. Like every possession, he's going to grind you harder. Every possession, he's going to make it even tougher. And I think this game could really send a message to the country that, listen, we just won the Big East regular season title, but that's not what we're about. We're about this. And if you're not watching this on YouTube, I just turned around and showed my shirt. Hopefully I caught that because I don't have eyes behind my head. But it's championships. It's banners. That's one piece of the season for UConn, but it's not the end all be all. But I'm expecting them to play smart. I think they continue to work through Donovan. I think you'll see a better game from Alex Karaban. He's starting to work through it. He made a 3 yesterday. I believe just 1, but he always plays well. I think that's what's the beauty of Alex Karaban, not to kind of go off on another tangent, but that I think his factor of shooting is what makes UConn go from great to elite. Like no one can beat them if Alex Karaban plays well. Nobody. There's not a team in the country, not a team that's presently assembled that can beat UConn if Alex Karaban plays at an elite level. And he has struggled against the quad 1 teams, There's no, getting around that. But that's the beauty of a team, is that everyone picks each other up. And lastly, how about Stefan Castle, man? Unbelievable. I'm so selfish with this. First off, again, shout out to Mama Castle on Twitter. She is a phenomenal follow. You can tell where he gets some of his drive and fire from. I can't imagine what he would look like in a second year at UConn. It's selfishly, I wish that could be possible, but the bottom line is he's an NBA player now. And I know the NIL kind of gets you some money earlier, but if you're a top 10, top 15 pick, if he keeps playing like this, 21 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists, whatever it was, adding that scoring piece is what's going to make him a top 10 pick. So, but who recruited that man? I don't know if it was Kamani. I don't know if it was Luke, but Dan Hurley certainly has him firing. And after this, right after this, we're going to talk about why Dan Hurley is 100% the National Coach of the Year. You're locked on. So Dan Hurley is your National Coach of the Year. And it's not as clear as UConn fans want to make it. I think we all are enamored with Dan Hurley. Don't get me wrong. I am firmly in the Dan Hurley camp. I couldn't be happier with his success, and he has sustained it. That's where we're going with this. But there are some compelling cases outside of Dan Hurley, but I'm going to tell you why Dan Hurley is, and because of the way I know human nature works. I'm going to read you some stats really quick. UConn's Ken Pom ranking the year before Dan Hurley arrived was 179. Okay. His first year, it went down to 98. Second year, 52. Starting to see some improvement, starting to see a pattern. Third year, 21. Fourth year, 22. Fifth year, 1. Now 6th year, 2. So what do I say all this for? Do I say it for people to go, well, Mark, it's not a lifetime achievement award? You're right, it's not. But I know the way AP voters and I know the way human nature and the way people think about these things work. He's going to win Coach of the Year because of this, because he's created this sustained success. And he's also pretty vocal about it. I mean, he had a comment, see if I can find it, essentially saying that even though, let's find it. That's not what he said. Pardon me. No, Dan Hurley, after the Seton Hall game, essentially said something to the point of, we have been the best team in college basketball since the end of last year, and we've sustained that throughout this year. And he's not wrong. You know, we may not be the number one in all the computer rankings in every aspect or every range, but when it comes to on the court, let's think about the games that they lost. They truly could be, they're 26-3. They truly could be 29-0. The first loss of the season came at Kansas, who is incredibly average this season for Kansas, because we had no Steph Castle, and Cam Spencer hurt his ankle like at the beginning of the game. And we were one possession down with the ball. Easily could have won that game with a healthy Stephon Castle. And also, I don't think Clingan was in the best shape possible yet, working himself into it. Those aren't excuses. The first two are actual facts. The third one is more of an excuse. Let's look at the second loss. Seton Hall. Seton Hall won that game because we stopped going through Donovan Clingan, and then he got hurt. I know that I made a mistake last week about the timing of that injury, so my memory's a funny thing. But what I will say is that we were within striking distance to win that game. It likely would have if Clingan stays fully healthy through that game, and we win. We probably win a tough road game. The last game, Creighton. Foul trouble. 2 quick fouls by Donovan Clingan. I think he was out in the 15-minute mark of the first half, and all hell broke loose. We were up 11-5, rolling. Karaban hits a 3 coming down to put them up 11-3. They made one more basket. I think it was a layup by could have been Ashworth. He scored like every possession, it seemed like. And then from there, kind of fell apart. We had to chase everyone. We had to jump out on screens versus kind of playing drop coverage, and that's not how you beat Creighton. So again, I'm not a huge fan of shoulda, woulda, couldas, but the reality is this team has consistently been great the entire season. So Dan Hurley deserves to be coach of the year. The only other person that I could look at that has a chance, I think, is Lamont Paris from South Carolina. Doesn't pain me to say that. I think Lamont Paris, he came over from Chattanooga. I know the SoCon really well. Pretty good coach. I think those teams were a little underachieving, but he was a hell of a recruiter there, and he's going to make them into a great team. But have they made like that big a jump right now? I think their preseason Ken Pom rank was 66th, and now I think they're in the 20s. Listen, they've surprised a bunch of people. Can't say his last name. I'm going to find it. What's the Iowa State coach? TJ Olsenberger. That's another one. I think you go there. And then the Utah State coach, Pringle. Danny Sprinkle. Not making fun of him. That's just my brain is laughing at itself. Danny Sprinkle, yeah, I mean, I could see them. He's in the hundreds. Ken Pom. This article was written a month ago, and they were at 29. I'm sure they're still in that 20 range. I mean, that may be more of a, again, but just that's a more compelling case. But just think about who Dan Hurley is. Basketball royalty. They're coming off a national championship. They're going to be a number 1 seed. They won the Big East regular season title first time since 1999, remember? And that's why he's going to win Coach of the Year. But in the theme of let's party like it's 1999, I wrote down some fun facts about the year 1999. The number 1 song in the country was by Cher, Believe. If you can believe that. The price of gas for a gallon was 93 cents. The good old days. The number 1 movie in the country was Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And in an article in Time, this is my favorite one. PayPal, which I'm sure everyone has used at least once in their life, was considered one of the 10 worst business plans of all time in 1999. Well, joke's on them. I think that's a great point to say that not every prediction will come true. Hopefully I'm as good as I was last Friday. Hopefully my prediction of UConn beating Marquette by over 10 points without Tyler Kolek, maybe more without Osi Iguodala. We'll find out more during the week on Locked On. And the last thing I'll say is, speaking of growth and all the things that are going on at Locked On, just to remind you, we've launched our first ever National Sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and also available on Amazon Fire TV, on all the free Fire TV channel apps. I'm glad that this is your first listen of your daily routine, but your second listen should be for Locked On College Basketball. Go give Locked On College Basketball your second listen and give my guys some support there, Andy and Isaac. This has been a Locked On UConn podcast. We'll see you tomorrow. Peace, love, and Huskies.